They say kindness is its own reward. But what if that's not the whole story? Lucas Reyes never expected anything in return when he fixed a stranger's car for free. Just another good deed in a long line of sacrifices that had left his auto shop drowning in debt and days away from closure. The customer, a disheveled older man who called himself Hector, seemed down on his luck, with only $87 to his name and a desperate need to get to an important meeting. What Lucas didn't know was that this wasn't just any stranded traveler. Behind the worn clothes and weathered hands was Hugo Brenner, one of the wealthiest men in the country. A billionaire who had grown tired of being surrounded by people who only saw dollar signs when they looked at him. A man searching for something genuine in a world built on facades. That rainy night in a failing garage would change both their lives forever. Because sometimes when you're at your lowest point, when you've given your last dollar, your last ounce of energy, your last shred of hope, the universe has a way of balancing the scales. And karma, when it finally arrives, can be spectacular. The sound of a wrench clattering against concrete echoed through the nearly empty garage as Lucas Reyes wiped the sweat from his brow. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, threatening to give out just like everything else in his life seemed to be doing lately. That should hold for another few thousand miles, Lucas said, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion as he closed the hood of an old Toyota. The customer, an elderly woman who had been coming to him for years, smiled sadly. I wish I could pay you more, Lucas. Times are tough for everyone. Lucas forced a smile. Don't worry about it, Mrs. Patel. Just keep bringing those lemon bars when you can. As the Toyota pulled away, Lucas turned to face the reality of his situation. Second Chance Auto, a name that had once filled him with pride, was now a cruel irony. The shop that had been his dream, his escape, was drowning in debt. The final notice from the bank sat crumpled in his pocket, the red letters burning through the fabric like a brand. Lucas glanced at his watch, 7:58 p.m. 2 minutes until official closing time, though he'd likely be here for hours more, trying to make sense of the books that refused to balance. His phone vibrated, a text from the hospice nurse caring for his mother. The medication costs had gone up again. One day at a time, he whispered to himself, a mantra that was wearing thin. At 34, Lucas felt twice his age, the weight of responsibility crushing him more each day. The rain had started falling, gentle at first but quickly picking up intensity, drumming against the metal roof of the garage. Lucas moved to lower the shop's rolling door when he heard it, the unmistakable sound of an engine struggling, coughing, dying. Through the curtain of rain, he could make out the silhouette of a car coasting to a stop directly in front of his shop. For a moment, Lucas considered pretending he hadn't seen it. He could close up, go home to his empty apartment, heat up whatever leftovers remained in his fridge, and collapse into bed. The bank would still be foreclosing. His mother would still be dying. And tomorrow would bring the same challenges, the same impossible choices. But Lucas Reyes had never been that person. Despite everything, he couldn't turn away someone in need. He stepped out into the rain, immediately soaked as he approached the vehicle, a Honda Civic that had seen better decades. The driver's side door creaked open, and an older man emerged, hunched against the rain. He looked to be in his early 60s, with weathered hands and clothes that had once been nice but now hung loosely on his frame. Looks like I'm having some terrible luck, the man said, his voice carrying a hint of resignation. Engine just gave out. I don't suppose you're still open. Lucas glanced back at his shop, at the bills piled on his desk, at the phone that would soon be ringing with collection calls, at the life he was watching crumble around him. Just about to close, Lucas said, then added, but I can take a look. Relief flooded the man's face. Thank you. Name's Hector. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Lucas helped Hector push the car into the bay. Under the bright shop lights, both the car and its owner looked even more worn down. Hector's clothes were clean but frayed at the edges, and his shoes had been carefully polished to hide their age. So what brings you out in this weather? Lucas asked as he popped the hood, more to fill the silence than out of genuine curiosity. Hector leaned against the workbench, watching Lucas work. Just passing through. Needed to get to Riverside by morning. The engine told a story of neglect, not willful, but the kind that came from having to choose between maintenance and necessities. Lucas saw the issue immediately. The timing belt had snapped, taking several valves with it. It wasn't just a quick fix, it was a major repair. I have to be honest with you, Lucas said, straightening up. This is going to take some time, and it's not going to be cheap. The timing belt broke and caused some serious damage. Hector's face fell. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a worn wallet, opening it to reveal a few crumpled bills. "This is all I have right now," he said, voice tinged with desperation. "About $87. I know it's not enough, but maybe we could work something out. I can't miss this meeting tomorrow." Lucas should have said no. Every business class, every mentor, every bit of common sense screamed that he should not take on a job that wouldn't pay. Not now. Not with the walls closing in. But something in Hector's eyes, a familiar desperation, a silent plea, made the decision for him. "Let me see what I can do," Lucas said, already knowing he was going to help this man. As Lucas began to work, the rain intensified, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the mechanical symphony of tools and parts. Hector sat quietly, watching with interest as Lucas methodically diagnosed the full extent of the damage. "You know your way around an engine," Hector observed after some time. Lucas nodded, lost in the familiar routine. "Been doing this since I was 14. My uncle owned this place back then. Taught me everything I know. He must be proud, seeing you take over the family business." A sad smile crossed Lucas's face. "He died 5 years ago. Heart attack. Never saw the shop start to fail." The words slipped out before Lucas could stop them. Something about the quiet night, the rain, and the presence of this stranger made it easy to speak truths he usually kept buried. "I'm sorry to hear that," Hector said. "This economy has been hard on small businesses." Lucas snorted. "The economy was just the final blow. I had a partner about 2 years ago, Dominic. We grew up together, trusted each other. He convinced me to invest in expanding the shop, said he had connections, investors. I put everything I had into it, took out loans against the property. Turned out he was skimming money the whole time, faking documents. By the time I figured it out, he was gone with all our cash, and I was left with the debt." The wrench in Lucas's hand tightened against a bolt with more force than necessary. "The worst part, he knew my mom was sick. Knew I needed that money for her care." Hector was quiet for a long moment. Some people only see opportunities, not the consequences of their actions. "Yeah, well, Karma seems to be taking her sweet time with Dominic. Last I heard, he's working for some big shot in San Diego, probably living the high life." Lucas wiped his hands on a rag. "Anyway, not your problem. Let me focus on getting your car running." As the night wore on, Lucas discovered more issues. Problems that had been masked by the major failure, but would leave Hector stranded again within days if not addressed. Each new discovery should have been another reason to give up, to tell Hector that it wasn't worth it. Instead, Lucas found himself reaching for parts he had been saving, using supplies he couldn't afford to give away. Around midnight, Hector insisted on stepping out to find them both some food. He returned with 2 sandwiches from the 24-hour convenience store down the street. "Not much of a payment for all your work," Hector said, handing one to Lucas. Lucas accepted the sandwich gratefully. Sometimes we all need a break. As they ate, Hector asked about the photos Lucas kept pinned to his bulletin board. Faded snapshots of a younger Lucas with his mother and uncle in front of the shop on opening day. A newspaper clipping of Lucas winning a regional auto repair competition. A picture of the shop when it was freshly painted and full of promise. "This place means a lot to you," Hector observed. Lucas nodded, throat tight. "It's all I have left of my family. My mom, she has advanced dementia now. Doesn't even recognize me most days. But sometimes she'll have a moment of clarity, and she'll ask about the shop." He swallowed hard. "I've been lying to her. Telling her everything's fine." Hector's eyes softened. "You're a good son." "No," Lucas shook his head. "A good son would have found a way to save her business. A good son wouldn't be one missed payment away from losing everything." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. "We all do what we can with what we have," Hector said finally. "Sometimes that has to be enough." By 3 a.m, Lucas had replaced the timing belt, repaired the valve damage, changed the oil, fixed a leaking radiator hose, and replaced brake pads that had worn down to almost nothing. His back ached, his eyes burned, but there was satisfaction in the work, in knowing that, for tonight at least, he had made something broken whole again. "That should do it," Lucas said, closing the hood with a sense of finality. "She's not pretty, but she'll get you to Riverside." Hector stood, reaching for his wallet again. "What do I owe you?" Lucas hesitated, mentally calculating the parts and labor. It would easily be over $800, money he desperately needed. But the thought of taking this man's last dollars felt wrong, especially after hearing Hector describe the important meeting he was heading to. Potentially his last chance to turn things around. The timing belt was simpler than I thought, Lucas lied. Let's call it even with the sandwich. Disbelief crossed Hector's face. I can't let you do that. You're not letting me do anything. It's my choice. Lucas held out the keys. Just pay it forward someday. Reluctantly, Hector accepted the keys. I won't forget this, Lucas. As Hector drove away, the taillights of the Civic disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness, Lucas felt an odd mix of emotions. Pride in his work, satisfaction in helping someone in need, and beneath it all, a crushing realization that his own situation remained unchanged. In a few hours, he would have to face the bank manager, explain why he couldn't make the payment again, and begin the process of losing everything. But for now, as he locked up the shop and stepped into the cool morning air, Lucas allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still some good left in the world. That kindness, even when it came at a cost, still mattered. What Lucas couldn't possibly know was that his act of generosity had been witnessed by eyes that saw far more than a simple car repair. That the universe, in its mysterious way, had already set in motion the wheels of a justice long overdue. Morning arrived with cruel indifference to Lucas's plight. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows of Second Chance Auto, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like his fading hopes. Lucas had managed 3 hours of fitful sleep on the lumpy couch in his office before the first call came. The hospice, with news that his mother had experienced another episode during the night. She's stable now, the nurse assured him. But we had to increase her medication. Translation: another bill he couldn't afford. Lucas rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a headache that would likely plague him all day. The memory of last night's generosity now seemed foolish in the harsh light of day. Parts he couldn't replace, hours he couldn't bill, all given to a stranger when his own world was collapsing. The shop phone rang again. Lucas stared at it, knowing exactly who it would be. After 5 rings, he finally picked up. Mr. Reyes, came the clipped voice of Vernon Hayward, the bank manager who held the fate of Second Chance Auto in his manicured hands. I expected you in my office at 9 o'clock sharp. Lucas glanced at the clock. 9:37 a.m. I apologize, Mr. Hayward. I had an emergency repair last night that kept me working until dawn. I see. The disapproval in Hayward's voice was palpable. And did this emergency repair provide you with the funds to cover your delinquent payments? Lucas closed his eyes. No, sir. Then I'm afraid we have nothing further to discuss. The bank has been more than patient, Mr. Reyes. Your failure to meet your obligations leaves us no choice but to proceed with foreclosure. You have 48 hours to vacate the property. The finality in Hayward's tone left no room for negotiation, no space for pleas or promises. Lucas knew he should fight, should beg for more time, but exhaustion had settled into his bones, sapping his will to resist. I understand, was all he could manage before hanging up. For several minutes, Lucas sat motionless at his desk, staring at the wall where his uncle's first dollar earned hung in a simple frame. 48 hours. After a lifetime of dedication, of early mornings and late nights, of holidays missed and vacations foregone, it all came down to 48 hours. The bell over the shop door jingled, startling Lucas from his thoughts. He quickly wiped his eyes, not wanting any customer to see him in such a state. Be right with you, he called, composing himself before stepping into the garage. A man in a sharp suit stood examining one of the vintage car calendars on the wall. He turned when Lucas entered, revealing a face that seemed vaguely familiar, though Lucas couldn't place it. Mr. Reyes? The man asked, extending a hand. Jackson Whitmore, representing Cornerstone Real Estate Development. Lucas reluctantly shook the offered hand, immediately wary. What can I do for you, Mr. Whitmore? Whitmore smiled, the practiced expression of someone accustomed to delivering news that benefited him at others' expense. I'm here on behalf of my client who recently acquired this property. The words hit Lucas like a physical blow. That's impossible. The bank doesn't own the building yet. They can't sell what isn't theirs. Actually, Whitmore countered, producing a folder filled with official-looking documents, they can. The building and surrounding properties were sold to my client this morning. The paperwork is all in order. Lucas snatched the papers, scanning them with increasing desperation. There it was in black and white, the sale of 1572 Oak Ridge Drive, along with 3 adjacent properties, to an entity called Phoenix Holdings. This can't be legal, Lucas muttered, though he knew it was. The bank had been waiting for him to default, had probably arranged the sale weeks ago. I assure you it is, Whitmore replied smoothly. My client has plans to develop this entire block into luxury apartments. The location, so close to downtown, makes it quite valuable. Lucas felt dizzy, the ground shifting beneath his feet. The bank told me I had 48 hours. And you do, Whitmore confirmed with a nod. My client is not unreasonable. You have until Thursday at noon to remove your personal belongings and equipment. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property. The man handed Lucas a business card. If you need assistance with relocation, my office can provide some recommendations for storage facilities. Lucas stared at the card, unable to process what was happening. His life's work, his family's legacy, reduced to a storage unit. I'll need your keys by Thursday, Whitmore added, his tone suddenly brisk and businesslike. You can drop them off at my office, or leave them with the construction foreman who will be on site. With that, Whitmore turned and left, the bell jingling cheerfully as the door closed behind him. Lucas stood in the middle of his shop. No, not his shop anymore, surrounded by the tools and memories of a lifetime. The vintage Mustang he'd been restoring for a local teacher sat half-finished in the corner. The shelves of specialized tools his uncle had collected over decades lined the walls. The photographs and mementos that told the story of Second Chance Auto stared back at him, as if waiting to see what he would do next. But there was nothing to do. No fight left to fight. No options left to explore. Lucas walked to the rolling door and pulled it down with a decisive clang, flipping the sign to closed. Today, at least, he couldn't face another customer, another problem he couldn't solve. He spent the rest of the day in a daze, mechanically sorting through items, trying to decide what he could salvage, what he could sell, what he would have to abandon. Each tool he packed represented a memory. The socket wrench set his uncle gave him on his 16th birthday, the diagnostic computer he'd saved for months to buy, the custom hydraulic lift that had been installed the day Second Chance Auto first opened its doors. Evening found Lucas sitting on an overturned bucket in the middle of the garage, surrounded by partially filled boxes, too exhausted to continue but too restless to stop. The sound of tires on gravel outside barely registered until a knock came at the side door. We're closed, Lucas called, not bothering to get up. The knocking persisted. With a sigh, Lucas pushed himself to his feet and made his way to the door. Through the window, he could see an older woman he didn't recognize. I'm sorry, he said as he opened the door, but we're not taking any new customers. The woman, probably in her 70s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, offered a sympathetic smile. I'm not a customer, dear. I'm Irene Campbell. I own the bakery across the street. Lucas nodded in recognition. Though they had never formally met, he had seen her sweeping the sidewalk in front of Campbell's Confections many times over the years. I saw the real estate man earlier, Irene continued. Word travels fast in this neighborhood. I wanted to check on you. The unexpected kindness from a virtual stranger threatened to undo Lucas's fragile composure. I'm fine, Ms. Campbell. Just packing up. Irene, please, she insisted, holding out a small box. I brought you some dinner. Nothing fancy, just a chicken pot pie and some cookies. No one should have to face hard times on an empty stomach. Lucas accepted the box, the warmth from the food seeping into his cold hands. Thank you. That's very kind. Kindness costs nothing, Irene said with a shrug. And sometimes it's the only thing we have to offer. She glanced around at the half-packed garage. Do you have somewhere to go? The question was gentle but hid a painful truth. Lucas had been so focused on losing the shop that he hadn't thought about what would come after. His apartment lease was month to month, and without the income from Second Chance Auto, he wouldn't make next month's rent. His savings were depleted. His credit was ruined. His options were non-existent. I'll figure something out, he said, the lie bitter on his tongue. Irene studied him for a moment, her eyes kind but knowing. My nephew has a moving company. He could help you with the heavy items, no charge. Lucas shook his head. I can't accept that. Can or won't? Irene asked, her tone gently challenging. Pride is a fine thing, Mr. Reyes, but it makes for cold company on difficult nights. Before Lucas could respond, a familiar rattling engine sound caught his attention. He turned to see the Honda Civic from the previous night pulling into the lot. Hector emerged, looking just as disheveled as he had during their first meeting. I'll leave you to your customer, Irene said, patting Lucas's arm. Think about my nephew's offer. Sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing we can do. With that, she turned and walked back toward her bakery. Lucas set the food inside and went to meet Hector, who approached with an apologetic expression. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Hector said, gesturing toward the closed garage. "I saw the sign, but I wanted to thank you properly for last night." "No interruption," Lucas replied, too tired to maintain the pretense that all was well. "The shop's closed for good, actually. Just packing up." Hector's expression shifted to one of concern. "What happened?" "Life happened," Lucas said with a humorless laugh. "Bad decisions, worse luck. The bank foreclosed, and some developer bought the property this morning. I have until Thursday noon to clear out." Hector looked genuinely distressed by the news. "After everything you've done for this community? For people like me? That's not right." "Right doesn't factor into business," Lucas said, echoing words his former partner had once spoken. "Anyway, how was your meeting? Car get you there okay?" Hector nodded, though something in his expression suggested the meeting hadn't gone as planned. "The car ran perfectly. Your work was exceptional." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "The meeting was enlightening. Not what I expected, but perhaps what I needed." Lucas nodded, not really interested in the details but glad his work had held up. "Good to hear. I wish there was something I could do," Hector said, looking around at the shop with genuine regret. "Unless you've got a couple $100,000 lying around, there's not much anyone can do," Lucas said, attempting humor but achieving only resignation. Hector reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "It's not much, but I want you to have this. Consider it payment for last night, and a thank you for reminding an old man about decency." Lucas started to refuse but remembered Irene's words about pride. With reluctance, he accepted the envelope. "Thank you." After Hector left, promising to stop by tomorrow to check on him, Lucas opened the envelope. Inside was $500 in cash, far more than the actual cost of the parts he'd used, but a drop in the ocean of his debt. Still, it would help with immediate expenses, maybe put gas in his truck for whatever came next. Lucas sat down to eat Irene's pot pie, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold reality settling around him. As night fell, he found himself alone with his thoughts, wondering where it had all gone wrong. Had it been trusting Dominic? Taking out the loans? Or was it last night, choosing compassion over business since one time too many? The irony wasn't lost on him, that his final act as owner of Second Chance Auto had been giving a second chance to someone else's vehicle, someone else's hopes. He fell asleep on the office couch again, dreams filled with roads that led nowhere and engines that wouldn't start. When morning came, it brought no relief, only the stark reminder that his time was running out. The shop phone rang early, startling him awake. It was the hospice again. His mother had asked for him. One of her lucid moments. Could he come? Lucas looked around at the half-packed boxes, the work yet to be done. Time was a luxury he didn't have, but this might be his last chance to speak with her, to say goodbye to the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, he promised. The visit was brief but precious. His mother, frail in her hospital bed, recognized him immediately, her eyes lighting up as he entered the room. "Lucas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My brilliant boy." He held her hand, telling her about a fictional busy day at the shop, about customers whose cars he had fixed, about the future he no longer had. He couldn't bear to tell her the truth, to dim the pride in her eyes with his failure. "Your father would be so proud," she said, squeezing his hand with surprising strength. "He always said you had magic in your fingers. Could fix anything." Anything except his own life, Lucas thought but didn't say. Instead, he smiled and told her he loved her, promised to visit again soon, knowing it might be a lie. As her eyes began to drift closed, the lucidity fading, he kissed her forehead and slipped away, the weight of unspoken truths heavy on his shoulders. When Lucas returned to the shop, he was surprised to find Irene's nephew and 2 other men waiting, ready to help with the moving. Despite his protests, they began loading the heavier equipment into a truck, efficiently organizing what had taken Lucas hours to sort. "Where are we taking it?" the nephew asked at one point. Lucas had no answer. By late afternoon, most of the essential equipment and personal items had been packed. The shop looked hollow, the ghosts of better days echoing in the empty spaces. Lucas stood in the center, turning slowly, trying to commit every detail to memory. The oil stain on the concrete that never came out, the height markers on the wall where his uncle had measured him every birthday, the worn spot on the counter where thousands of customers had leaned while discussing their vehicles. Tomorrow it would all be gone, replaced by construction equipment and plans for luxury apartments that none of his loyal customers could afford. The thought should have angered him, but Lucas felt only a profound sadness and acceptance. As darkness fell for what would be his final night at Second Chance Auto, Lucas sat on the hood of his truck in the empty garage, nursing a beer and watching as the security light outside cast long shadows across the floor. In 12 hours, he would hand over the keys to a place that had been more than a business. It had been his home, his identity, his purpose. What came next, he had no idea. But as Lucas raised his bottle in a silent toast to the empty garage, he couldn't help but feel that sometimes an ending, no matter how painful, was just the universe making room for something new to begin. Dawn broke over Second Chance Auto for the last time, golden light streaming through windows soon to be demolished. Lucas had barely slept, spending his final hours in the shop organizing the few remaining possessions that would fit in his truck. Everything else, the hydraulic lift too large to move, the vintage signs his uncle had collected, the memories embedded in every corner, would stay behind, casualties of his failure. At precisely 11 o'clock, Lucas heard vehicles approaching. Not just one, but several, their engines purring with the unmistakable sound of luxury and power. He stepped outside, squinting in the bright sunlight, to find the most surreal sight. A line of high-end vehicles, a Bentley, 2 Mercedes, and a Tesla, parked in front of his humble shop. Men in suits emerged from each car, their expressions impossible to read behind dark sunglasses. Lucas felt a momentary panic. Had the developers sent security to ensure he left? Was this some final humiliation? Then the door to the Bentley opened, and a familiar figure stepped out. It took Lucas several seconds to reconcile the image before him with his memory. Gone was the disheveled appearance, the worn clothes, the air of desperation. In their place stood a man of unmistakable authority, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than Lucas's truck. "Hector?" Lucas questioned, disbelief coloring his voice. The man smiled, removing his sunglasses to reveal the same kind eyes that had watched Lucas work through the night just 2 days ago. "Not exactly," he replied, extending his hand. "Hugo Brenner. Forgive the deception, Lucas." Lucas stared at the outstretched hand, his mind racing to process what was happening. The name resonated somewhere in his memory. Hugo Brenner, the reclusive billionaire investor whose name occasionally appeared in business news. "I don't understand," Lucas managed, hesitantly shaking Hugo's hand. "Perhaps we should talk inside," Hugo suggested, gesturing toward the shop. In a daze, Lucas led the way back into Second Chance Auto, acutely aware of the half-packed boxes and stripped walls. Hugo followed, seemingly taking in every detail with keen interest. 2 nights ago, Hugo began once they were inside. "My driver took ill suddenly while we were passing through town. I sent him home in another car and decided to continue driving myself. I've always enjoyed taking the wheel occasionally. Keeps me connected to reality." He smiled ruefully. "Reality had other plans when my car broke down outside your shop." Lucas leaned against his workbench, trying to make sense of the situation. "So the story about needing to get to Riverside? A fabrication, I'm afraid," Hugo admitted. "Though not entirely. I was on my way to finalize a business acquisition. What I didn't mention was that the business was here, specifically this entire block." The pieces began falling into place in Lucas's mind. "Phoenix Holdings. That's you." Hugo nodded. "For the past year, I've been looking to invest in communities like this one, areas with potential, with heart. But I've learned the hard way that finding the right people to partner with is the true challenge. People with integrity, with skill, with vision." "So the broken-down car, the sob story, it was all a test?" Lucas felt a flush of anger cutting through his confusion. "Not initially," Hugo clarified. "The car genuinely broke down. But once I saw how you worked, how you treated a stranger you thought couldn't pay you properly." He paused, his expression softening. "Lucas, do you know how rare that kind of integrity is? In my world, everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle." Lucas scoffed. "And what's your angle here? Coming back to gloat before your bulldozers roll in?" Hugo's expression remained calm in the face of Lucas's hostility. "No bulldozers, Lucas. At least, not for Second Chance Auto." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "These are the new plans for the development, revised yesterday afternoon." Reluctantly, Lucas took the folder and opened it. Inside were architectural renderings of a modern building complex. In the center, prominent and untouched, was Second Chance Auto, reimagined with a new facade but clearly preserved. I don't understand, Lucas said again, looking up from the plans. The world has enough luxury apartments, Hugo replied simply. What it needs more of is people like you. People who do the right thing even when it costs them everything. Before Lucas could respond, the shop door opened again. Another suited man entered, and behind him, Lucas felt his blood freeze in his veins, was Dominic, his former partner, the man who had stolen his money and left him drowning in debt. Dominic looked different, thinner, more haggard, his once confident posture now defeated. He couldn't meet Lucas's eyes. You remember Mr. Torres, I believe, Hugo said, his tone suddenly cooler. Lucas nodded, unable to speak past the knot of anger and betrayal that had instantly formed in his throat. Mr. Torres has been working as my chauffeur for the past 8 months, Hugo explained. A position he secured using falsified references and credentials. Dominic shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. Imagine my surprise, Hugo continued, when I heard your story 2 nights ago and realized my own employee was the partner who had betrayed you. The universe has a strange sense of humor, doesn't it? Lucas looked between them, still trying to process what was happening. Is that why you came back? Because of Dominic? I came back because of you, Lucas, Hugo corrected. Because in a world where people like Mr. Torres exist, people who take shortcuts, who betray trust, who value money over integrity, we desperately need more people like you. Hugo turned to Dominic. Give it to him. With obvious reluctance, Dominic stepped forward and handed Lucas an envelope. I'm sorry, he mumbled, the words clearly difficult for him. Lucas opened the envelope to find a cashier's check for an amount that made his head spin. Enough to cover all his debts with plenty left over. That's the money he stole with interest, Hugo explained. Consider it restitution. I don't want his money, Lucas said, trying to hand the check back. It's not his money, Hugo replied firmly. It's your money. He's been working it off for months now, and will continue to do so for quite some time. Dominic's face flushed with shame as he backed away, returning to stand by the door. As for the shop, Hugo continued, producing another set of documents. These are the ownership papers for the property. The deed has been transferred to a new entity, Phoenix Automotive. Lucas stared at the papers, his name clearly listed as the sole proprietor. Why are you doing this? Because karma is real, Lucas, Hugo said simply. Sometimes it just needs a little help. He gestured around the shop. You gave up everything to help a stranger. Now that stranger is returning the favor. The only difference is that I can afford to be more generous than you could. Lucas ran his fingers over the embossed seal on the deed, still not quite believing it was real. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept, Hugo urged. Say you'll take the second chance and build something even greater than before. The development will bring new customers, new opportunities. Your shop will be the cornerstone of a revitalized neighborhood. Outside, an unexpected sound drew their attention, applause. Lucas moved to the window to see a small crowd gathered. Irene from the bakery, her nephew who had helped with the moving, Mrs. Patel with her old Toyota, and at least a dozen other regular customers and neighbors. Word travels fast, Hugo said with a smile. They've been waiting to hear if you'd stay. Lucas felt something break open inside him. A dam holding back emotions he'd suppressed for too long. Hope, disbelief, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense that perhaps, just this once, the universe had balanced its scales. What happens to him? Lucas asked, nodding toward Dominic. That's partially up to you, Hugo replied. Justice or mercy, both have their place. Lucas studied the man who had nearly destroyed his life, now standing broken and humiliated before him. The satisfaction he had imagined feeling in this moment was absent, replaced by something more complex. Pity mixed with the understanding that carrying hatred served no purpose. Let him go, Lucas said finally. His debt to me is paid. Relief washed over Dominic's face, followed quickly by shame as he realized the magnitude of Lucas's mercy compared to his own actions. As you wish, Hugo agreed, nodding to the man by the door, who escorted Dominic out. Now, shall we go greet your welcoming committee? Together, they stepped outside into the sunshine, where cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. As Lucas shook hands and accepted embraces, he caught sight of Irene, who gave him a knowing wink. Told you, she called over the noise. Sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing we can do. In that moment, standing in front of Second Chance Auto, no, Phoenix Automotive now, surrounded by people who had come to celebrate his strange reversal of fortune, Lucas finally understood. Sometimes, when you give without expectation, the universe conspires to give back in ways you could never imagine. And sometimes, karma arrives in a broken-down Honda Civic, driven by a billionaire in disguise.